The galaxy was no longer the silent, cold expanse it once was. Every star, every shadow, and every system had a story to tell now. And for Earth, that story had only just begun. Commander Rylus Jarn sat hunched over the control panel of the Vanguard, the hum of the ship's engines vibrating through his boots. His hands, steady despite the adrenaline that coursed through him, gripped the data slate. It was a map, an ancient relic unearthed by a team of explorers who had unearthed a mystery buried deep within the heart of human space. "You're sure about this?" Lieutenant Grev Caro's voice cut through the tension. His eyes, wide with disbelief, flicked from the screen to Rylus. "The data's solid," Rylus replied, his voice sharp, eyes fixed on the flickering coordinates displayed before him. "The map's real. We've crossed the threshold. We're in the no-cross zone now." Drev stood in stunned silence, the weight of the words sinking in. The no-cross zone, an area of space marked by every civilization in the galaxy with a stern warning. Even the most powerful empires had avoided it, not because of its strategic value, but because of the legends tied to it. And legends, as everyone knew, had a dangerous way of being rooted in truth. "Can we really be the first to cross it?" Greb asked, his voice tinged with doubt. Rylus didn't look up from the display. "The first in history, yes. But we're not exactly the first to push the boundaries." He jabbed a finger at the map. "Our position puts us right on the edge. Beyond it, there's nothing but the Zaltari Empire." The air in the cockpit grew thick, as if the ship itself was holding its breath. The Zaltari. Their name alone carried a weight, a shiver down the spine of anyone who had dared to venture close enough to their borders. A species more reclusive than even the most secretive races of the galaxy. They had kept to themselves for centuries. Their greatest secret, their monopoly on quantum crystals, was coveted by nearly every civilization. Those crystals were the lifeblood of galactic energy systems, the very thing that powered the ships and stations of entire fleets. But the Zaltari hoarded them. They guarded them as though their very existence depended on it. And now, for reasons unknown, they were at the doorstep of human space. "Captain," Greb's voice broke through the silence. "Something's wrong. Their fleet's moving." Rylus stood in a flash, his body instinctively reacting to the sense of impending danger. He rushed to the viewport, where the stars had begun to dance with unexpected movement. The Vanguard was positioned on the edge of human space, facing the Zaltari's highly fortified border. The sensor display buzzed to life with new data, and Rylus's stomach churned as the numbers ran across the screen. The Zaltari fleet had shifted course, directly toward the no-cross zone. "We can't be sure they even know we're here," Greb said, looking over Rylus's shoulder. "Maybe they haven't detected us yet." Rylus didn't answer. His thoughts were elsewhere, on the data, on the ancient maps, on the legends. He had never believed those old stories, not the way some did, but there was something about the Zaltari silence, their avoidance of the no-cross zone for so long, that struck him deep. Something about the maps, their eerie accuracy. They had crossed into forbidden space for a reason, and now humanity had walked into their backyard, and the consequences were unfolding right before their eyes. "The Zaltari don't make mistakes," Rylus muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "They never cross unless they're forced to." He punched a few commands into the display. The Vanguard moved into a slow, cautious drift, avoiding any unnecessary comms, keeping as far from the Zaltari fleet's radar as possible. The zone itself was an ancient, sprawling labyrinth of dead stars, black holes, and shifting gravity fields. But the real danger lay in what had been hidden for centuries, the ancient beacon that marked the entrance to the Zaltari domain. Grev let out a low whistle. "They've triggered it. The beacon's up." The soft glow from the control panels deepened as the map's coordinates blinked once more. Rylus felt his pulse quicken as the data flowed. Disturbances, ripples in space, signals that shouldn't have been there. Whispers of an ancient warning that had now been disturbed. Without warning, the Vanguard shuddered. An unexpected jolt ran through the ship, and a sudden wave of static took the comms offline. Ryla's breath caught in his throat. The sensor grid had gone dark. Damn it, he slammed his fist on the console. Get those sensors back online, now! Grev was already at the comm station, hands moving frantically over the display. They've jammed us. It's a pulse. The pulse. Rylas knew what it meant. An old, automated defense system designed to protect the no-cross zone from any intruders. But this pulse wasn't just a warning. It was a call. A summons. The Zaltari had heard it. In the distance, the Zaltari fleet moved, no longer uncertain. Their course had shifted, but now it was clear they weren't interested in avoiding humanity's presence. They were coming straight for it. They didn't take the map seriously. They didn't understand what they were walking into, Rylas said under his breath, his hands already flying over the controls. But they'll learn. We'll make them learn. The tension in the cockpit thickened, the quiet pressure of the moment making every sound, every footstep, every breath seem amplified. The Zaltari were on the move, and humanity had no choice but to respond. There was no retreat, no stepping back into the shadows of the galaxy, no room for hesitation. We're about to make history, Rylas said, voice steady despite the pounding in his chest. We will make sure the galaxy never forgets the name Earth. As the Vanguard powered up and moved into the heart of the no-cross zone, the universe itself seemed to shudder in anticipation. The Vanguard drifted deeper into the heart of the no-cross zone, its sensors intermittently flickering as the ancient beacon continued to pulse in the distance. Commander Rylas Jarn stood at the helm, eyes narrowed as the faint hum of the ship's thrusters vibrated beneath his feet. The distant stars outside the viewport shifted, the blackened void of the zone swallowing up any trace of light. The silence was thick, oppressive, broken only by the rapid clicks of the console beneath his fingers. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not like this. He'd expected a subtle, methodical escalation, one that would give Earth the time it needed to prepare, to respond. Instead, the Zaltari had pushed their limits, their fleet charging straight toward the heart of human space like an unstoppable juggernaut bent on domination. It was too soon. Far too soon. Suddenly, a shrill alarm shattered the quiet. The sensors were picking up something, a shift in the fabric of space, just outside the outer rim of human colonies. Rylas's eyes snapped to the console, his heart skipping a beat. The Zaltari had moved faster than anticipated. Alert, came Grev Caro's voice, tight with tension. We've got multiple bogies, far more than we're equipped to handle. Rylas's jaw tightened as he scanned the readouts. The coordinates matched. The Zaltari had crossed the line, exactly where he had feared they would. Their massive fleet was heading toward the helium-3 mining colony on Lyra 7, a rich deposit of quantum crystals. We don't have the firepower to stop them, Grev added, his tone barely above a whisper, yet it carried the weight of the truth. We don't need to stop them, Rylas replied, his voice unwavering. We need to buy time. Alert command. We've got a defensive plan, but it's going to be tight. Before Grev could respond, the ship lurched forward. Rylas gripped the edge of his console as alarms blared once more, the hull of the Vanguard vibrating with the power of an unseen pulse. It was the beacon. It had activated, sending a shockwave that scrambled Earth's sensor grid. Damn it, Rylas muttered. They've triggered the pulse. They're not just probing us, they're going for it. Lyra 7's in their sights. Rylas's mind raced. The Zaltari were ruthless, calculating in their efficiency. They wouldn't hesitate to wipe out the colony if it stood in their way. Lyra 7's defenses were barely sufficient for a skirmish with local pirates, let alone an empire like the Zaltari. A voice crackled over the comm. Commander! The Lyra 7 station is under attack. Energy levels spiking. We've lost contact with the colony's main facility. Rylas cursed under his breath. It had started. All units, prepare for immediate deployment. We're not waiting for backup, he ordered, his voice sharp and commanding. Grev's face hardened as he leaned into the controls. Understood. Setting course for Lyra 7. We're on our own, aren't we? For now, Rylus answered, his gaze locked on the display. We're going to make them regret ever thinking we were weak. With a few quick commands, Rylus ordered the Vanguard into warp, the stars outside the viewport blurring into streaks of light as the ship accelerated toward Lyra 7. In the meantime, he activated the fleet-wide comms. Commander Rylus Jarn to all available forces. He spoke with authority, his voice filling the air. This is not a full-scale war, it's a message. We're defending humanity's right to exist, and we're doing it on our terms. Make no mistake. This is a fight for survival. There was no hesitation in his voice. The human forces had been preparing for years, studying the Zaltari's patterns, their technologies. It was why they had advanced so quickly, why they had spent decades understanding their enemies, even when the Zaltari themselves were unaware of the threat humans posed. A crackling noise interrupted Rylus's thoughts. The message from Lyra 7 came through, barely audible over the static. Please, help. The Zaltari are attacking. They're everywhere. Rylus clenched his fists. The Zaltari had struck quickly, their assault devastating the colony's defenses in a matter of hours. He could almost see the destruction in his mind's eye. The jagged remnants of buildings, the smoldering wreckage of freighters carrying supplies, the fleeing civilians struggling to escape. We'll make it there in time, he said, more to himself than to Grev. And when we do, we're not just fighting to protect resources. We're fighting to show them that humanity doesn't bend. We don't fall without a fight. As the Vanguard neared the outer orbit of Lyra 7, Rylus gave a final command. Launch the stealth probes. It's time to see what our little surprise can do. The probes, adapted from Zaltari tech scavenged years ago, would be their first line of defense. Small, quick, and difficult to detect, they would infiltrate the Zaltari supply lines, causing disruption where it hurt the most. With each passing minute, the probes would target the flow of resources, slowing the Zaltari's advance. Rylus knew the fight for Lyra 7 was just the beginning, but it was a beginning that would define the rest of humanity's struggle. The Zaltari were powerful, but they had underestimated one thing, the human spirit. And that, Rylus knew, was something no empire could ever conquer. As the Vanguard broke through the atmosphere of Lyra 7, the full scale of the assault became clear. The sky was thick with debris, smoke, billowing from shattered buildings. The Zaltari's ships loomed above, their immense silhouettes blocking out the sun as ground forces stormed the planet's surface. All units, engage. Rylus's voice was cold, firm. Defend the colony at all costs. Humanity doesn't run, humanity fights. The Vanguard unleashed its firepower, sending a barrage of projectiles that slammed into the Zaltari ships. On the ground, human forces, civilians turned soldiers, fought with desperation, planting explosives in the wreckage of their homes, creating chaos wherever they could. But the Zaltari, fierce and relentless, pressed forward. The first clash was brutal, the smell of burning metal and smoke thick in the air, the sound of boots pounding against the cracked ground, the heavy clang of weapons clashing in the distance. Rylus's heart raced as he watched the chaos unfold. He was not merely a commander now. He was a symbol of humanity's resolve, and this was their proving ground. The Zaltari had made a grave mistake, and humanity, for all its flaws, was about to show them that it could and would fight back. The Vanguard drifted behind the rocky moon of Lyra 7, just beyond the reach of the Zaltari's powerful sensor grid. Rylus Jarn stood over the control panel, his eyes fixed on the readout. The planet below burned, its surface scarred by the relentless assault from the Zaltari fleet. Yet amidst the chaos, humanity had found its moment. The time for stealth had arrived. "Commander," Grev Caro's voice cut through the tension. We've deployed the probes as per your orders. They're in position, and we've started jamming their communications. Rylus nodded, his eyes narrowing. Good. They won't know what hit them. The Zaltari had always relied on their overwhelming technological advantage, their fleet a nearly unstoppable force. But what they hadn't expected, what no one had, was humanity's ability to adapt, to bend their technology and turn it against them. The stealth probes, crafted from salvaged Exaltari tech, would be the first strike. The human engineers, quick on their feet and brilliant in their resourcefulness, had modified the devices into the perfect tool for sabotage. Rylus paced, thinking of the colony's civilians. No military force had ever been stationed there. But it wasn't a lack of soldiers that made the difference. It was the resolve of the people. They had seen their homes shattered, their families scattered, but they fought nonetheless, hiding in the ruins, setting traps, disrupting supply lines, and sabotaging anything they could. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make the Exaltari sweat. They're already starting to shift their forces, Grev observed, his voice tight with urgency. We're causing confusion, but they're adapting quickly. We've got to keep the pressure on them, Rylus replied, tapping a few commands into the display. We need to break their logistics. If we can stretch them thin enough, they'll have to retreat. This is where the real war begins. On the screen, the Zaltari fleet seemed to swell with power, its ships large and dark, like leviathans on the hunt. But now, they were disoriented. The probes had found their mark. The Zaltari relied on their crystal-powered sensors to track and coordinate their fleet, but the probes were interfering with those systems, sending out false readings and scrambling their communications. The human resistance had created a network of sabotage, stretching from one corner of the planet to the next. Rylus closed his eyes, picturing the faces of the civilians still on Lyra 7, the ones who had picked up weapons from the wreckage of their homes. Some were former miners, others farmers, and a few, even engineers. They had taken the fight to the Zaltari in ways Rylus could never have predicted, using their intimate knowledge of the planet to strike at the heart of the invaders' operations. "Commander," came a voice from the comms. "The southern mining facility has been taken out. They're reeling from the disruption." "Good," Rylus said, his eyes gleaming with a quiet intensity. "We hit their supply lines. If we keep them off balance for long enough, they'll have no choice but to split their forces. But we've got to keep the heat on." The next few minutes passed in a blur of activity. Rylus's mind raced as he formulated the next step. The Zaltari would be trying to track their sabotage efforts, and if they did, they would respond swiftly, likely with overwhelming force. But for now, their attention was split. The probes were working as intended, jamming their sensors, sowing chaos in the ranks. "Rev, initiate the second phase," Rylus ordered. Grev nodded sharply, activating the next wave. Below them, human forces on the ground moved quickly, taking advantage of the confusion. Civilian leaders, miners, engineers, farmers had formed tight-knit groups, each with a specific mission. They used old mining equipment and salvaged Extari weapons to create ambushes, sabotaging the invaders' supply convoys, blocking their supply roads, and setting explosive charges in key infrastructure. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't enough to defeat the Zaltari outright, but it was enough to create cracks in their armor. Then came the first true sign of progress. "Sir," Grev said, his voice tinged with disbelief, "their reinforcements are delayed. Their flagship is losing fuel." Somehow, Rylus's heart quickened. That flagship, Vengeance, was the core of their offensive, and if they could cripple it, the rest of the fleet would be forced to respond with desperation. He gripped the console, steely determination settling over him. "The flagship's weak. We need to hit it where it hurts. Now." The probes had set the stage. The Zaltari's reliance on their powerful, centralized communication system was their greatest strength, and their greatest weakness. Without it, they were just another force in the galaxy, vulnerable to human ingenuity. Rylus's team, along with the civilian militias, were already on the move, working in tandem to disrupt any attempt to recover from the sabotage. Rylus had a single goal in mind: to create enough chaos to send the Zaltari into full retreat, to show them that humanity was not a species to be trifled with. Reb's voice crackled through the comms. "The reinforcements are pulling back. They're starting to break off." Rylus allowed himself a small, tight smile. "We've got them on the ropes. Don't let up." They continued their fight under the cover of darkness, with every scrap of debris and every corner of the ruined colony used as a weapon against their invaders. The Zaltari, accustomed to fighting in the open and commanding from their massive warships, were now facing the kind of guerrilla warfare they had never expected, and it was starting to show. But despite the small victories, the tide was still against them. The Zaltari had superior firepower, and their ships were closing in on the colony's perimeter. They were running out of time. Rylus could feel the weight of that knowledge bearing down on him. He clenched his jaw, the grit in his teeth grinding as he stared out into the dark expanse of space. Rylus Jarn stood at the edge of the ancient outpost, its silhouette looming against the distant stars like a forgotten relic of an age long past. The planet beneath their boots was harsh, dry, and barren, perfectly unremarkable, except for one thing. This outpost, buried deep within the no-cross zone, had waited for centuries to be discovered. It had been days since the Vanguard had docked at the outpost, its crew working in silence as the alien landscape loomed around them. Rylus could feel the weight of time pressing down on him. He didn't need to be reminded that every minute spent here meant that the Zaltari were growing stronger. The battle at Lyra 7 had ended in a temporary victory, but Rylus knew the Zaltari weren't the type to sit idle. They would return. "Commander," came the voice of Grev Caro, breaking his thoughts. "You should see this." Rylus turned, his boots crunching on the dust as he followed Grev into the heart of the outpost. The walls were ancient, covered in faded symbols that didn't match anything Rylus had seen before. Some looked like crude alien carvings, others like a complex web of lines, as if the language had evolved through thousands of years. Despite the worn, crumbling stone, the structure had a strange energy to it, as if it was waiting for something, or someone, to awaken it. "What have we found?" Rylus asked, his voice steady but filled with anticipation. Grev gestured toward a series of controls, half buried beneath layers of debris. He worked quickly, his fingers brushing across the dusty surface, searching for the right sequence. The air in the chamber grew thicker, the quiet hum of activity around them amplifying the sense of anticipation. Finally, a deep rumble echoed through the walls as the controls flickered to life. "What is this place?" Rylus murmured, staring at the long-forgotten console. "It's not Zaltari." "No, it's not," Grev said, his voice laced with disbelief. "This isn't anything we've seen before. But what it's activating—" His voice trailed off as a loud mechanical thud reverberated through the chamber. The floor beneath their feet shifted, and a large metallic door slid open, revealing an inner sanctum, cold, dark, and illuminated only by the faint light of an ancient device in the center of the room. Rylus stepped forward, his boots scraping against the stone floor as he made his way toward the object. It was unlike anything he had seen. An imposing cylinder, smooth and sleek, encased in a crystalline frame that hummed softly with a strange energy. As Rylus drew closer, a familiar yet foreign feeling swept over him. It was the same sensation he'd felt when they'd first activated the ancient beacon. A connection, a response to something far beyond their understanding. "What the hell is that?" Grev asked, his voice filled with awe and confusion. "It's a weapon," Rylus said, his voice barely above a whisper. The realization hit him like a bolt of lightning, each word heavy with the weight of its implications, a weapon of unimaginable power. He moved closer, carefully inspecting the device. It was clear now that this wasn't just a piece of ancient technology. It was a weapon capable of neutralizing entire fleets. The crystalline frame, with its intricate patterns, was more than just decoration. It was designed to channel and focus energy. Whatever it was, It had the potential to shift the balance of the war in humanity's favor. "Get the engineers," Rylus ordered, his voice firm. "We need to know how to use this thing. And we need to know fast." Grev nodded and rushed off, his footsteps echoing down the long corridor. Rylus stood alone for a moment, eyes locked on the device. The weight of their discovery settled over him. This wasn't just a turning point. It was humanity's last hope. The Zaltari's superior technology had held them at bay for far too long, but with this disruptor, they might finally have a chance to break through the barrier. But time was running out. The Zaltari would not wait for them to adapt to this weapon. They would strike again, and if humanity wasn't prepared, they would pay the price. Hours passed as the engineers, aided by defectors from the Zaltari's subjugated species, worked tirelessly to reverse engineer the quantum disruptor. Rylus could hear their voices through the comms, frantic, urgent, as they tried to decipher the ancient alien technology. Each minute stretched endlessly, the stakes rising with every passing second. "Commander," one of the engineers, Adaris, called through the comms, his voice shaky. "It's working, but we're not sure how long it will last. This thing's power output is unstable. We might only have one shot." "Palm shot is all we need," Rylus said, clenching his fists. The weight of their mission rested on his shoulders, but he wouldn't show doubt. Not now, not ever. The chamber seemed to grow colder as the minutes ticked by. The walls, once still, began to hum in resonance with the energy building inside the disruptor. The ancient machinery, once dormant, now awakened, throbbed with life, each pulse rippling through the air like a thunderclap, vibrating against Rylus's chest. "Commander, we're ready," Grev's voice came through again, steady this time, but there was no mistaking the urgency. "The disruptor is operational, but if we're going to use it, we need to get it to their fleet now." Rylus nodded. It was time. He turned and made his way back to the Vanguard, the full weight of their discovery sinking in. This was their chance, the one they had fought for. The quantum disruptor might be their only hope of surviving the Zaltari onslaught. He couldn't waste it. As the Vanguard prepared to depart the ancient outpost, Rylus took one last look at the device that had altered the course of the war. It was humanity's weapon now, and if they could make it work, it would change everything. The Zaltari wouldn't know what hit them. But as the Vanguard broke orbit, Rylus couldn't shake the nagging feeling that the weapon, powerful as it was, might come at a cost too great to bear. The Vanguard cut through the cold void of space, its hull shimmering under the distant light of dying stars. Commander Rylus Jarn stood at the edge of the bridge, his back straight, hands clasped behind him. His gaze was fixed on the tactical map laid out before him, tracing the movements of the Zaltari fleet. Their flagship, Vengeance, a gargantuan warship bristling with weaponry, loomed ahead, its dark silhouette barely visible against the backdrop of distant nebula. But Rylus wasn't focused on its imposing size. He was focused on its vulnerability. The quantum relay, the core of their fleet's coordination, was a weakness, and that weakness was their chance to strike. "We're ready, Commander." Grev Caro's voice cut through the tension, his eyes locked on the data streaming across his screen. "The disruptor's been primed. It'll only take one shot." Rylus turned, his eyes locking with Grev's. There was no room for doubt. No second chances. The fate of Lyra 7 and the rest of humanity rested on this one strike. "Make sure our people know their roles," Rylus said, his voice low and steady. "This isn't just an attack. It's a statement. If we fail, we'll never get another shot at them." Grev nodded, his fingers dancing over the control panel. "I'll make the comms call." As the Vanguard moved deeper into the heart of the Zaltari formation, Rylus allowed himself one last glance at the makeshift crew, human soldiers, civilians who had become fighters, defectors from the Zaltari's own conquered races. Their faces were a mix of determination and fear, but their resolve was clear. They were ready. They knew what was at stake. The strategy was simple but audacious. A small fleet, led by the Vanguard, would slip through the outer defenses of the Vengeance's perimeter. Their mission? Infiltrate, place the quantum disruptor within range of the relay, and disable it. The Zaltari were focused on brute force. They believed their fleet was unstoppable. They would be blindsided. "Are the stealth probes in position?" Rylus asked, his fingers twitching in anticipation. "They're deployed," Grev confirmed. "No signs of detection yet." The bridge fell silent as the crew waited, tension rising like an invisible wave. Rylus focused on the tactical map, watching as the Vanguard edged closer to the Vengeance. Each second felt like an eternity. They had to get inside the Zaltari's defensive perimeter, close enough to launch the strike, before the fleet had a chance to react. Rylus wasn't worried about the initial assault. The real challenge would be getting close enough without being noticed. The Exaltari had never seen anything like the human ingenuity that had gone into the stealth probes. Once those probes got within range, they would start jamming the Exaltari's communications, creating just enough confusion to give the Vanguard a chance to slip through their sensors undetected. But the seconds were ticking away, and the Vanguard was getting closer to the heart of the Zaltari fleet. Rylus's hand tightened around the armrest of his seat. He could feel the pulse of the moment. This was it. "Commander." Grev's voice was tense. "We're at the outer perimeter. It's now or never." Rylus stood. "All hands, brace for deployment. This is our moment." With a steady breath, Rylus made his way to the comms station. "Everyone, listen up. We infiltrate the Vengeance, hit the relay, and we're out. No distractions. No heroics. We hit hard, we hit fast, and we leave before they realize what's happening. Remember, this is humanity's chance to show them we're not just survivors. We're a force to be reckoned with." The crew responded with nods, their faces set in grim determination. There was no room for hesitation now. Rylus turned to Grev, who was already tracking the deployment coordinates. "Grev, take us in." The Vanguard lurched forward as the smaller fleet of stealth ships, shadowed by the larger warship, slipped past the defensive perimeter of the Zaltari flagship. The space around them was eerily quiet, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. "Get ready," Rylus said, gripping the edge of the console. "We have one shot at this." The Vanguard slid into position, right outside the Vengeance's blind spot, undetected for now. Rylus's eyes flicked to the status display. The probes were jamming the Exaltari fleet's communication lines, causing chaos among their ranks. The real test was about to begin. "Launch the strike team," Rylus commanded, his voice firm. The stealth craft, small and nimble, rocketed from the Vanguard's bay, slipping silently toward the Vengeance. The crew of the strike team would have no time for mistakes. They were on a clock. The longer they stayed inside enemy lines, the more likely they were to be detected. Rylus watched the live feed as the strike team's approach was met with nothing but silence. The jamming was working. The Zaltari were unaware. Approaching the relay, Grev's voice came through, tense with anticipation. "We're close." Rylus's heartbeat quickened. "Do it." Signal came through. The strike team had reached the relay. The quantum disruptor, now in place, would overload the relay's systems, shutting down the Vengeance's entire fleet coordination. In the chaos, the Zaltari would be forced to react blindly. It was a high-risk maneuver, but it was humanity's best chance to cripple their enemies before they could retaliate. Seconds stretched as Rylus's mind raced. If they failed, the consequences would be catastrophic. But if it worked... "We're in," Grev said. The words were simple, but they hit with the force of a wave. Relays down, the fleet's in disarray. The Zaltari flagship staggered. Its once synchronized movements faltered, sending ripples of confusion throughout the fleet. Rylus couldn't help but smile. They had done it. But as the disruption spread, the Zaltari's reaction was swift. The flagship, now operating on emergency protocols, shifted into attack mode. Their desperation was palpable. They would not go down without a fight. Rylus's grip tightened. Deploy all remaining forces. This isn't over yet. The vanguard moved swiftly, coordinating with the rest of the human forces. The fight was far from won, but humanity had struck the first blow. Now it was up to them to follow through and see if the Zaltari would be able to recover from the damage done. And Rylus? He was ready for whatever came next. The chaos of the Zaltari fleet was undeniable. Commander Rylus Jarn stood at the helm of the vanguard, his eyes fixed on the carnage unfolding before him. The Vengeance, once a symbol of Zaltari power, now floated aimlessly, crippled and disoriented. But even in disarray, it was still a formidable opponent. "We've got them on the ropes." Grev Karo's voice came through, sharp with urgency. "The disruptor worked, but they're still reacting, throwing everything they have at us." The Zaltari, in their desperation, were shifting tactics, sending fragmented fleets in all directions. They weren't operating as a coordinated unit anymore. They were simply trying to survive. The vanguard had played its part, striking at the core, but now the true battle was unfolding, and it was up to the human forces to finish what they had started. Rylus stood tall, watching as the human fleet, much smaller and less equipped than the Zaltaris, moved with deadly intent. They had the advantage of surprise, and the Zaltari had underestimated humanity's ability to fight back. The stealth probes were still jamming the Zaltari's communications, but it wouldn't be enough to hold them forever. The clock was ticking. "Prepare for attack," Rylus ordered, his voice unwavering. "Target their weak points. Engines, supply lines. Don't give them a chance to regroup." The vanguard rocked as enemy fire pierced its shields, the pressure of the Zaltari's retaliatory strikes growing heavier by the minute. Rylus gritted his teeth, his focus never wavering. His team was doing everything they could, launching precise assaults on the Zaltari's supply ships, but they were still outnumbered. The stakes had never been higher. "Commander!" A voice from the comms crackled, cutting through the chaos. "The Vengeance is activating its self-destruct sequence." Rylus's blood ran cold. He knew the Zaltari were ruthless, but this was desperation. The flagship was about to go up in flames, and the consequences would be catastrophic. "Abort the attack," Rylus barked. "Get as far from the Vengeance as possible." But the Zaltari were too far gone. The countdown had begun, and there was no stopping it. The human fleet scrambled to put distance between themselves and the flagship, but Rylus knew it was already too late. He clenched his fists, feeling the weight of the lives at stake. His crew, the civilians who had become soldiers, all of them fighting for survival. The Zaltari had pushed them to the brink, and now they were going to make sure humanity felt the cost of this battle. "Get the fleet clear," Grev shouted, his voice thick with fear. "This is going to be bad." The seconds stretched long, each one hanging in the air like an eternity. Rylus felt every heartbeat reverberate in his chest. He could hear the frantic commands of his crew, the thrum of engines as the vanguard veered away from the Vengeance. But it wasn't enough. A blinding flash filled the viewport. The Vengeance erupted in a violent explosion, the force of it shaking the vanguard to its core. The shockwave hit them moments later, rattling the ship as if it were a toy caught in a storm. Rylus's grip tightened on the console, his eyes wide as the sheer scale of the destruction unfolded before him. The Vengeance had torn itself apart, taking a significant portion of the Zaltari fleet with it. For a moment, everything was silent. Then the comms came alive, a broadcast from the Zaltari communications system, broken and garbled, but unmistakable in its tone. A single voice, filled with panic and fear, echoed through the channels. "They're retreating. We've lost everything." The word sent a ripple of shock through Rylus's chest. The Zaltari, once so sure of their dominance, were now in full retreat. Their flagship was gone, and with it, their morale. But the price of victory was heavy. Rylus turned his gaze away from the viewport, his expression hardening. "All ships, report status," he ordered. His voice was steady, but inside he felt the weight of every life lost. The human fleet had fought bravely, but the cost was too high. The comms crackled with responses, many of them weak, interrupted by static. The destruction of the Vengeance had left its mark on the battlefield. Ships were adrift, damaged beyond repair, their crews struggling to maintain control. The human fleet had suffered significant losses, more than Rylas cared to count. Grev's voice came through, more subdued than before. "We've lost the second wave. The self-destruct took out half of our attack fleet." The air on the bridge felt thick, suffocating. Rylas didn't respond right away. He could hear the weight of grief in Grev's voice. He knew that each loss was personal. He could feel it too, the ache of every name he had yet to remember, every sacrifice that had been made to get to this point. But Rylas was a commander. His duty was clear. "Focus on the retreat," he said firmly. "We need to keep the remaining Zaltari forces from regrouping. We've won today, but the war isn't over." Grev hesitated, and Rylas could hear him take a deep breath before responding. "We'll get it done," Grev said. "But it's not just the fleet we're fighting anymore, is it?" "No," Rylas agreed, his gaze falling on the destruction around him. "It's everything." Zaltari had underestimated humanity's resilience, but now, as their fleet splintered and their flagship burned, the cost of that arrogance had been made painfully clear. The Zaltari were retreating, but humanity had paid a heavy price to force them back. The battle was over, but the war was far from finished. As the vanguard pulled back, Rylas allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. The human forces had held their ground, had fought with everything they had, but victory had its scars. And the journey ahead would be just as brutal as the battle they had just won. The battlefield had fallen silent, but its echoes would haunt them for lifetimes. The vanguard hovered in the aftermath, its hull scarred and battered, but still intact. The void outside the ship was eerily calm. Too calm, Ryla thought. The firestorms that had consumed Lyra 7 were now reduced to faint smudges of light, remnants of a war that had claimed more than just ships and soldiers. It had taken something deeper. Ryla stood at the viewport, his arms folded tightly across his chest. Below him, the once thriving mining colonies were now little more than ruins, craters where homes had once stood, blackened buildings crumbling under the weight of war. The survivors, displaced and broken, drifted like ghosts through the wreckage, their faces hollow from loss. The streets were empty, save for the occasional group huddling in makeshift shelters, their eyes filled with the dull, defeated light of those who had nowhere left to go. The victory at Vengeance had come at an unspoken cost. Their fleet had fought with everything it had, but now it was barely a fraction of its former strength. The human forces had done the impossible. They had shattered the Zaltari's dominance in one brutal blow. But the price? Rylas could feel it in the hollow spaces in his chest, in the weight of the names of fallen comrades, in the faces of families who would never see their loved ones again. Was more than he could bear. His hand gripped the edge of the console, his eyes tracing the destruction below. Every corner of the galaxy had felt the weight of this conflict. Earth's forces had triumphed, but at what cost? The comms crackled to life, the voice of Grev Caro cutting through the silence. "Commander, we've finished the last of the repairs, but there's something you need to see." Rylas exhaled sharply. The damage to the fleet had been extensive, but they had managed to scrape by. Still, he knew there was no amount of repairs that could heal the wounds the battle had inflicted on his crew. "On my way." He stepped into the operations room, where a small group of engineers and military personnel had gathered around a holographic display. The map was filled with coordinates and satellite imagery of the destroyed colonies. Each one, a reminder of what they had lost. "It's not just the colonies," Grev said, his voice low, almost reluctant. "The Zaltari are retreating. We've intercepted their communications and their empire's crumbling." Rylas froze. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. The Zaltari, once an unstoppable force, were beginning to unravel. Internal strife, political unrest, What had once been a united empire was now fractured, its foundation cracking under the weight of their failures. The self-destruct of the Vengeance had been the final blow to their command structure, and with the flagship gone, the Zaltari were in disarray. "They'll regroup," Rylus muttered, the words heavy on his tongue. "They always do." But even as he said it, he knew that something fundamental had shifted. The Zaltari might retreat, but they would never forget the taste of defeat. And neither would humanity. "Are we ready to speak to the colonies?" Rylus asked, his gaze not leaving the map. "They need to hear from us." Grev nodded, his eyes tired but determined. "We're ready, Commander." Rylus took a deep breath. He had been a soldier for most of his life, but this was different. This wasn't just a battle for territory or resources or pride. This was about rebuilding. It was about showing the survivors that the fight wasn't over, that humanity would stand, no matter the cost. He stepped forward to the comms console and keyed in the sequence to broadcast to the remaining colonies. The room fell silent, and for a moment, Rylus wondered if he could find the right words to reach them. To remind them that despite everything, they hadn't lost. "People of Earth," he began, his voice strong but laced with the weight of sorrow. "We have faced our darkest hour. The Zaltari thought we were weak, that we would bow before them. But they were wrong. We've fought for our homes, for our families, and for our future. This victory is not just ours, it's yours. You've held strong and we will rebuild together." He paused, his eyes scanning the faces of those listening in. The damage they had sustained wasn't just physical. It was emotional, spiritual. "This is just the beginning. The Zaltari may retreat, but they will not forget. And neither will we. Earth stands united, and we will protect what is ours, our homes, our people, our future." The broadcast ended, but the silence that followed was suffocating. The human cost of the conflict was beyond measure. Every word Rylus had spoken seemed too small in comparison to the weight of what had been lost. "They've started to mourn," Grev said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "The families, those who survived, they're still looking for their loved ones. They've lost everything." Rylus turned away, unable to look at the map anymore. He had been a leader in battle, but now he was faced with a different kind of fight, one that had no clear end. Victory had come at too high a price. He stepped toward the viewport again, watching the broken remains of Lyra 7 as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the wreckage. The galaxy would change because of this war, and humanity's place in it was secured. But at what cost? "We'll rebuild," he said softly, more to himself than anyone else. "We'll rebuild, but we'll never forget." Grev placed a hand on his shoulder, a silent gesture of support. The Zaltari might have been forced to retreat, but the war had left its scars on everyone. The galaxy would remember the day humanity rose up, but it would also remember the faces of those who had paid the ultimate price for it. The war had left its mark on humanity, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Commander Rylus Jarn stood in the center of the bustling command deck, his hands clasped behind his back, his posture rigid. His gaze was fixed on the holographic map that displayed the current position of Earth's forces and the retreating Zaltari fleet. The enemy was in disarray, their once proud empire crumbling under the weight of their defeat. Earth had endured the unimaginable. The scars of battle were evident in the faces of his crew, in the hollow eyes of the displaced civilians, in the crumpled ruins of colonies that had once thrived. Yet, despite the carnage, there was a quiet sense of resolve among humanity's survivors. The victory had been hard won, but it was theirs. The Zaltari were no longer the looming threat they had once been. The space around Earth was no longer filled with the uncertainty of potential invasion. It was filled with the determined presence of humanity's newfound sovereignty. Earth had earned its place in the galaxy, and the galaxy knew it. The contested region, once an uncertain border, was now officially recognized as human space. The name was a declaration, an assertion that humanity would not only survive, the once fragile species had now proven itself capable of standing up to the most formidable empire in the galaxy. The Zaltari, however, were not done. They had retreated to their core systems, licking their wounds, but their empire was unraveling. Internal power struggles had begun, political unrest spreading like wildfire through their ranks. The cracks in their once dominant structure were too wide to ignore. Earth's triumph had destabilized their entire foundation. Rylus walked over to the viewport, looking out at the stars that now seemed more accessible, more attainable. He could see the streaks of warships leaving human space, the remnants of the Zaltari fleet making their retreat. But even as the immediate threat faded, the reality of what had been lost settled heavily on him. The faces of the dead, the comrades he had lost, haunted him. Every victory had come with a price, and though the war was over, the toll it had taken would be felt for generations. "Commander," Grev Caro's voice interrupted Rylus's thoughts, drawing his attention to the console. "We're ready for the broadcast. The colonies need to hear from you." Rylus nodded, his chest tightening. The message would be simple, but it would have to carry the weight of the sacrifice, the pain, and the hard-earned victory. It would have to remind the galaxy that humanity's resolve was not just forged in battle, it was shaped by the spirit of its people. He stepped up to the comm station, placing his hands firmly on the console. The room quieted, the weight of the moment settling over the crew. This was their moment, the culmination of everything they had fought for. "People of Earth," Rylus began, his voice strong but laced with the quiet sorrow of those who had witnessed the horrors of war. "We have faced the might of an empire, and we have stood firm. The Zaltari came to our doorstep, thinking we were weak, thinking we would fall. But we showed them something they didn't understand. We showed them that when humanity stands united, there is no force in the galaxy that can break us." Rylus paused, his gaze steady as he looked at the faces of those around him, their eyes filled with the same fire that had carried them through the darkest days of the war. "Today we stand as one, scarred, yes, but unbroken. Our victory is not just a military one. It is a victory for every family, every colony, every individual who refused to surrender. It is a victory for humanity's place in this galaxy." He let the silence hang for a moment, letting his words sink in. "The Zaltari are retreating. They will be a broken empire from here on out. Their strength is shattered, their unity fractured. And to any empire who still thinks humanity is an easy target, hear this. Earth will not be overlooked again. We've proven that we are a force to be reckoned with, and we will defend our home with everything we have." Rylus's hand tightened on the console. "This is our dawn, the dawn of a new era for humanity. We will rebuild. We will rise from the ashes of war, and we will stand tall as the galaxy watches." As the broadcast ended, Rylus stood in silence, his eyes lost in the starlit distance. The war had ended, but the work was just beginning. Earth's place in the galaxy had been secured, but there was no illusion that the road ahead would be any easier. There would be rebuilding, there would be struggles, and there would be enemies who sought to test their resolve. But for now, Earth had earned its peace. Rylus turned, his gaze sweeping over the crew. They were battered, but there was a light in their eyes, a quiet pride, a recognition of what they had accomplished. The sacrifices had been brutal, but humanity had emerged stronger for it. "We've earned our future," Rylus said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of the battle, the loss, and the victory. "Let's make sure we don't forget what we've fought for." As the crew nodded, the Vanguard began its journey back toward Earth, the stars ahead still burning brightly, as if in acknowledgement of the new order that had begun. The Zaltari were no longer the greatest threat. Humanity had claimed its place. And now it would define its own destiny. Rylus watched the stars for a moment longer, his thoughts lingering on the faces of those he had lost. The comrades, the soldiers, the civilians who had given everything. Their sacrifices were not in vain. They had written a new chapter in the history of the galaxy, one that would forever bear the mark of humanity's strength. The galaxy had learned something important that day. It had learned that humanity would no longer be a bystander in the universe. It had learned that Earth would defend itself, that Earth would fight for its place in the stars. And most of all, it had learned that Earth was no longer just a planet. It was human space, and it would not be ignored. The message had been sent. The galaxy would remember. What should humanity's next move be after the Zaltari retreat? Solidify our defenses or push forward into the unknown? Comment below. Hit subscribe and stay tuned for more epic HFY adventures.